Honorable Nobanda, now looking at Honorable Swart.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, Dr. Ngubane. Good to see you again. I'd like to ask you, you quoted from the Public Protector's report, and you indicated that you had taken legal advice not to take it on review. One of the findings of the Public Protector's report, it could be, you could say it's an observation, is that she says on page 329, it appears that the conduct of the Eskom board was solely to benefit of Together in awarding contracts to them, and thus it appears to be inconsistent with the PFMA. The short question is, would you not agree, and I don't know if you've been following this inquiry, but the evidence here and a lot of evidence in the media in general is overwhelming to the effect that the board, the conduct referred to in this Public Protector's report, was to the benefit of Together in awarding coal contracts to them.
Swart, that's why I look forward to this commission, because the books will be examined and the truth will come out. What has been printed in the media is what people believe, but I'm saying we worked with documentation which satisfied me that proper processes in procurement were followed. I cannot gainsay what comes out of EXCO, of committees of the board, without evidence.
Dr. Ngubane, I'm sure you also appreciate that a lot of evidence has been tendered before this inquiry as well. And of course, there is also investigations that are taking place. And we know the Asset Forfeiture Unit has already acted in terms of the Trillion McKinsey contract. So we don't have to wait for a commission, whilst I appreciate there'll be further evidence. But there is already now a lot of evidence that indicates state capture of various SOEs and Eskom. And would you still say that you would rather wait for a commission of inquiry?
I would prefer a situation where people don't just come and say what they believe or want to say. If there was a situation where we sat here and someone said something, the evidence leader cross-examines them, my lawyer cross-examines them, that would be the fair process. Remember, we never had a chance to go and present ourselves to the Public Protector.
No, I appreciate that, but you also indicated that you decided as a board not to take her observations on review, but there was an input from the executives. Mr. Molefe and Mr. Koko, they made substantial inputs to the public protectors, but I take your point that the board itself did not make an input. But let's just have a look at the run-up to November, December of 2015. And you indicated that the country was in a horrible state. And that obviously was early in the year, and that commendably, we haven't done an inquiry into the turnabout of Eskom at that stage when it came to the power and the blackouts. Would you say that situation continued towards the end of 2015, November, December of 2015?
At that stage, we're having a number of improvements in terms of the construction of new power stations. That alleviated the risk of poor electricity reserves. We were always hovering around probably 1,500, not the 4,000 to 5,000 that had been there before, which necessitated load shedding. So the situation was improving.
And when one then considers the meeting that took place in December, the round robin meeting related to the guarantee, 1.8 billion, why was that so urgent then, if it was a situation of a turnaround?
It was 2015.
Yes.
Remember that
I'm sorry, your mic.
Optimum Coal Mine had decided not to supply Hendrina, and Hendrina produces 2,000 megawatts of power, and it was clear that we were going to run into trouble. On top of that, they'd gone into business rescue. So there were a number of factors that were creating a crisis. So when management came to us and said, there's going to be a crisis here, we had to act.
Was the situation not that Optimum had asked for an imposition of the hardship clause, and that had been negotiated, and you might not be aware of that, prior to Mr. Malefe's arrival, which would have resolved that problem, but when he arrived, he refused to accept the increased price that Optimum then, before it was placed under business rescue, had offered, and which had gone through certain committees, but when it got to Mr. Malefe, he refused to continue with that contract.
I'm not aware of the details, but what Mr. Malefe told me was that Mr. Glassenbeck, the head of Optimum Holdings, had wanted export parity prices and wanted to change from 150 to something like over 300. And that's what he rejected. That's what, according to him, that's what he told me.
I understand. But if you see the totality of the picture that we now sitting with, and again, you could say it's not been subjected to proper cross-examination, but you've got a company that provides to Hendrina, and they are under a hardship clause, and they're entitled to increase that price in negotiations. Those negotiations, according to the evidence, was accepted by Eskom. It was referred to the CEO, Mr. Malefe, then at the last for his sign-off. It was accepted by certain committees at Eskom itself, so it couldn't have been so outrageous. And then it was rejected by Mr. Malefe. Then we start to see the pressure that was put on Optimum to sell to Tegeta. Are you aware of the meeting of the 24th of November that took place with Mr. Mashilikoko, the business rescue practitioners, where certain conditions were imposed on Optimum for the sale, and where they were saying we were prepared to sell, but it had to be the whole of Optimum Holdings, including the terminal, including Koenfontein, and those type of conditions. Are you aware of that?
No, I'm actually surprised that you say Mr. Koko was part of that.
But his evidence was that he was involved. His evidence before us was that he sat in a meeting with the business rescue practitioners and saying, and it's on record, so maybe you haven't seen it, and you're welcome to look at that as well. But you see, there was an involvement of Eskom in this whole process.
No. I said in my notes, Eskom's involvement was in terms of securing its interest in coal.
Yes.
Not in the sale.
Yes. But
That's
you see, at that same time, I understand your version, at the same time, a 2 billion rand penalty was imposed on Optimum. Do you not agree that that adds pressure to them to sell?
Again, this is what I had. From as early as 2012, Optimum was washing its coal for export, the RP1 quality grade for export, and giving the middlings, that is what remains out of the washing, to Eskom.
I understand that, Dr. And please forgive me for interrupting you, because I do understand that process and that background, but we know that that was reduced to a fine of 500 million after the Tegeta sale was concluded. So it was, I'm just illustrating additional pressure to sell. We also know that Minister Zwane was in Switzerland putting pressure on Optimum to sell. Are you aware of that at all?
Well, from the reports, yes. But again, I can't sit here before Parliament.
I understand. It's what you've heard. But you understand, and then we've got a meeting in December where there is a a 1.8 billion rand guarantee. Have you ever, as a board chairman of state-owned enterprises, have you ever experienced a guarantee being given by a state-owned company to buy another company?
You know, Honorable Swart, that issue never came to the board about the guarantee. What came to the board was the amount of money that was required to secure coal.
I do understand, but it was in excess of the board's mandate as well, was it? It should have gone to the minister. Do you not agree?
No. Let's put it this way. If the budget in the corporate plan is accepted by the minister, the IFC can authorize spending to the amount of the budget. That does not require fresh authorization.
I'm really sorry to interrupt. I've got 3 minutes.
The purchase of coal
yes,
is part of the corporate plan.
I understand, but the minister indicated that she had to give that approval for that specific guarantee, and it wasn't obtained. But can I just ask you, because it's very clear, and I put the same thing to the acting chairman of the board, Mr. Khoza, where he also said Eskom played no role in the purchase. And after a few questions, and after me putting to him, he conceded that Eskom played a significant role. And in fact, the finding of the public protector that Eskom board was acting to the benefit of Tegeta is in fact true. Do you still hold that it's not so?
Well, in terms of what came to us about that round-robin resolution, it was expressly to pay for coal.
I understand. But can I just say, in hindsight, when you see in hindsight? In hindsight?
In hindsight, the things I've read in the press and heard in some of the evidence convinces me that it's urgent that the Commission sifts through all the documentation and find exactly what happened.
I understand, but the challenge is this Public Protector's report came out with serious allegations in November of 2016, and billions of rands have left the country. We can't wait for another commission of inquiry. Do you understand that, Mr. Ngubane? We are in a serious situation. Eskom is in a serious situation.
I agree, but I'm saying we wanted to raise the review explicitly to cover those issues.
But weren't you concerned about the funds leaving the country? Let me just put it to you this way. The meeting in April, the 12th of April, when the 659 million prepayment was agreed to, was it not coincidental that it was the same day that Tegeta needed 600 million to buy Optimum?
I can assure you that never came to the board's attention.
But the Public Protector says it should have. And people of your knowledge should have been aware of that. And so, can I just read to you, on the 22nd of November, Eskom board member, Mr. Mark Pomensky, at that time, Eskom board member, you know Mr. Mark Pomensky, he was a member of your board.
Yes, sure.
He's also a member of Oak Bay Resources, the Gupta company. Is that not so?
Yes.
He writes an email that is in the Gupta leaks. In terms of the investment committee, I'm available to start right away. He writes it to Atul Gupta. I'm at the tail end of the main acquisition of Optimum Coal. That is a board member that is saying they are involved with the acquisition of Optimum Coal. Yet you say Eskom was not involved. Now you obviously were not aware of that, I would presume.
It came out of the Gupta leaks. It never came out of him or anyone on the board.
Again, we'll establish the veracity of that, but it seems to fit into the narrative because, again, he writes another very startling email where he says at the conclusion of, on the 10th of December, when we had that discussion, you had that meeting on the 1.8 billion, he writes an email to Atul Gupta, which fits directly into the state capture allegations. Congratulations on a brilliant and well-thought-planned strategy acquisition of Optimum Group of companies. Well done, I'm proud of you. This is the beginning. I'm more than sure you and the team will make a huge success. Let me know when you're ready to discuss the operational implementation. He's speaking as an Eskom board member. Don't you think that's outrageous if it is proved to be true?
Well, it is.
And so, Dr. Ngubane, your evidence today, you've given evidence of your links with the Guptas. We know Mr. Molefe was linked with the Guptas. We had Exaro here. The main reason, at the end of 2015, there was a crisis at Onit, was the cancellation of the Exaro contracts. Are you aware that Mr. Molefe refused to meet with one of the most black-empowered companies, and that is Exaro? We've got that evidence. But he was continuously in contact with Gupta-related companies. Don't you think, if that came to your attention as a board chairman, that that would be outrageous?
Certainly, but what I know is that the Exaro contract expired in 2015.
Yes, sorry, but they requested to extend it. They wrote letters to the minister. The minister refused to speak to them even. The minister, and that resulted in the closure of the Arnott Colliery. 1,500 people were kicked out of their jobs. But the minister intervened to ensure that the Gupta-related companies got this deal. Don't you think that that is outrageous?
Well, if that's the case, it's outrageous. However, the Exaro was getting 51 rand per gigajoule. And all the other people were getting around 18, 19.
Dr. Ngubane, my time has expired, but the Mafube contract was supplying coal to Arnott at 132 rand per ton. Yes, it might not have been the best quality, but it was 1 million tons per year on a conveyor belt. And that was then stopped. No reason was given. That contract was stopped. We've got the evidence before us. And then what happened was the Optimum mine coal that was supposed to go to Hendrina was sent to Arnott at 450 rand a ton, as opposed to the 150 that Hendrina was getting. But Hendrina's output was then reduced, so that is how it happened. And if you look into that, Dr. Ngubane, I'm sure you would share our concerns as that information is made bare.
I certainly do.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid my time has run out. Thank you, Dr. Ngubane.
Thank you, Honorable Swart. Honorable